I found a file I never recorded. I noticed it because my gas was lower than it should have been. Not empty, just wrong. Then I saw fresh mud on my bumper, like my car had been somewhere I've never driven.
Chapter 1: A File I Never Recorded. I didn't notice it right away. That's the part that still bothers me. I was already in the car, already halfway through my morning routine, when my eyes landed on the fuel gauge. It was lower than it should have been. Not empty, not even close, just lower. Enough to make you hesitate, enough to make you check it twice. I stood there in the parking lot, staring at the dashboard like it had just said something off. Nothing alarming, nothing you could point to, but the feeling stuck. The night before, I came home from work, parked, shut off the engine. I remember that clearly. The click when the ignition stopped, grabbing my bag from the passenger seat. It's not a blurry memory, it's solid. And still, the fuel was lower. I stepped out, walked around the front of the car, and that's when I saw the dirt. Dark, wet, stuck under the bumper. Not splash dirt, not city dirt. The kind you get when you drive off pavement, gravel, back roads, places I don't go. I crouched down and touched it. It was fresh. My fingers went cold even though the morning was warm. That should have been the moment I stopped pretending. I stood up and looked around. The car was exactly where it always is, same spot between my neighbor's gray sedan and an empty space. Quiet lot, normal morning, no broken glass, no forced entry, doors locked, alarm never went off. And the keys were on me. They always are. So I did what everyone does. I told myself I was tired, that I mixed something up, that I probably remembered wrong, that nothing was actually wrong. I got in, started the engine, and drove to work. All day, the thought followed me. I didn't let it turn into anything concrete, because once fear has a shape, it's harder to ignore. As long as it's vague, you can keep moving. That night, in the garage, I looked at the bumper again. The dirt had dried, lighter now, like something aging, like evidence that's been sitting too long. That's when I did something I hadn't planned on doing.
I took out the Dashcam. I bought it months earlier. Nothing fancy, just something you install and forget about. I barely drove at night anyway. Same routine every day. Work, home, store. Same routes. I put the memory card into my laptop. The files were sorted by date, and right there, in the middle of them, was a file that shouldn't exist. Timestamp 0217, length 46 minutes. I stared at it longer than I want to admit. The feeling wasn't panic. Panic is loud. This was quieter, colder, like realizing something you thought was solid isn't. I clicked play. At first, nothing, just darkness, then sound, tires on asphalt, and then the image came up. Headlights pulling out of a driveway. My driveway. The angle showed part of the hood and the windshield. Everything looked normal, too normal. The car was moving smoothly. No hesitation, no rush. Speed was clean, legal. Turns were perfect. Whoever was driving knew exactly what they were doing. I leaned closer, trying to catch a reflection. Sometimes I could see hands on the wheel. Couldn't tell if they were male or female. I never saw a face. It was like the camera avoided it on purpose. The route wasn't mine. The car turned where I never turn, passed through an industrial area, then an old stretch of road where the stores shut down years ago. I recognized a gas station I hadn't driven past in forever. Around 18 minutes in, the video cut for a second. Then it came back. The car was stopped. The sound changed, more hollow, like being surrounded by something big and empty. A warehouse, a hangar, a lot. That's when I heard breathing. Not mine. I knew that immediately. It wasn't coming from the front. It was coming from behind. Low, slow. The mic barely picked it up, but I heard it. I closed the laptop. Not because I was scared, because I knew that if I kept watching, I wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. I sat there in the dark garage, just looking at my car. The next morning, the fuel was even lower, and there was a new file. Chapter 2. I found a reason to believe. The next morning, I decided I'd been stupid. That was the first thing I grabbed onto. Stupid means fixable. People don't like the unknown, but what they really hate is admitting they're not in control. So I picked the easier option. I found an explanation. I told myself the Dashcam probably recorded some background file, that the timestamp glitched, that maybe one of my neighbors drove through the lot and the camera messed up the location, that the dirt was from rain, that the fuel level dropped because of temperature changes. I repeated those ideas like a grocery list while making coffee. Logic is a great painkiller. It doesn't heal anything, but it gets you out of bed. Before leaving for work, I checked the car again, slowly, walked around it, looked at the locks, checked the windows. Everything was fine. I put the keys in my pocket and felt a little relief. The metal was cold, solid. If the keys were on me, the car was mine. I drove to work with the music louder than usual, just so I wouldn't think. But every time my eyes drifted to the dashboard, they went straight back to the fuel gauge. It was too steady. Not like after a drive, not like a leak, like someone knew exactly how much to take so I wouldn't notice right away. That thought showed up on its own. I didn't invite it. At lunch, I stopped by a service center. Nothing dramatic, just a routine check. I didn't mention the video. I said the car felt off. The mechanic smiled. I didn't take it personally. I knew how I sounded. He checked the fuel system. No leaks, no errors. Diagnostics were clean. Everything's fine. Car's like new. That should have calmed me down. Instead, it left me empty. Because if the car was fine, then the problem wasn't the car. That evening, I put the memory card back into my laptop. I didn't want to. I kept putting it off. The way you delay a phone call you know is going to change something. There were more files now. 3, all at night, all around the same time, all with different routes. I opened the second one. This time, I forced myself to watch closely. I tried to be an observer, not a participant. Like it wasn't my car, not my building, not my life. The driving was smooth. No rush, no hesitation. Whoever was behind the wheel wasn't nervous. They didn't keep checking mirrors. They weren't worried about being stopped. They knew they wouldn't be. Around the 12-minute mark, the car slowed down. I heard a click, a sound I'd recognize anywhere. Doors unlocking. The back door. I froze. The camera couldn't see inside. It couldn't see who opened it, but the sound was clear. Then a rustle, quiet, careful, like someone trying not to be heard. The car stayed parked for almost 5 minutes. Then it started moving again. I realized I wasn't breathing. I didn't know when I'd stopped. I skipped ahead. At 38 minutes, the screen flared for a second as the headlights caught something off to the side, and I saw a reflection in the glass. Not a face, a shape, the outline of a head in the back seat. It vanished the moment the light changed. I closed the laptop slowly, carefully, the way you close a coffin lid so you don't hear the sound. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and listened to the house. Every creak, every pipe,
Every distant sound from the street felt too loud. I put the keys under my pillow, not because I was afraid of theft, because I needed to feel their weight. I woke up at 3:18, not from a noise, not from a dream. I just opened my eyes. And that's when I understood what scared me most. It wasn't the person taking my car. It was the fact that he knew more about me than I knew about him, which meant this story already had a script, and I wasn't the main character.
Chapter 3. Someone was inside the car. By the third day, I stopped pretending this was an accident. Accidents don't repeat themselves with that much patience. They either happen once or fall apart the moment you look too closely. This didn't fall apart. It held together, neatly, almost politely. I started simple. I installed a new alarm system, changed the locks, bought a small camera and aimed it at the parking lot so it covered the driver's door and the license plate. When the guy at the store asked what I was trying to protect, I answered too fast, my car. He nodded, but the look he gave me said he understood more than he asked. At home, I hid the keys, not on a hook, not in a drawer, not anywhere you'd check first. I wrapped them in an old t-shirt and put them inside a toolbox under the sink, an awkward place, a stupid place, the kind of place you don't go into without a reason. I felt calmer once the protection had a shape. Fear is unstoppable when it's abstract. The moment you turn it into a checklist, it backs off a little. That night, I went to bed earlier than usual, on purpose. I didn't check the windows. I didn't walk the house with a flashlight. I didn't want to look like someone who was afraid, not even to myself. Before falling asleep, I thought one last thing. If nothing happens tonight, then I was right. That was the last naive thought I had. I woke up to vibration, not sound. Actual vibration, like something dull was trembling inside the house. It took a second to realize it was my phone. The screen was glowing. A camera notification. Motion detected. 0241. I sat up in bed. The room was dark. The house was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no engine noise. I opened the app. The camera showed the parking lot. My car was still there. Nothing was happening. I almost exhaled, and then I saw movement. The door opened. Not suddenly, not with force, the way you open a door you're used to opening. A person stepped halfway into frame. The camera was mounted too high to catch a face. I saw a shoulder, an arm, a dark jacket with no markings. He didn't look around. He knew where the car was. He knew where to reach. And that's when I understood the worst part. The alarm didn't go off. No sound, no flashing lights. The door opened like it had been invited. I jumped up, ran into the hallway, nearly tripped on the rug. My heart was uneven, but my thoughts were sharp. I grabbed my jacket, my house keys, and froze. The car keys weren't there. They were still under the sink. I was sure of it. I ran outside. The parking lot was empty. The place where my car had been was just a black rectangle of asphalt. I stood under the streetlight, feeling the cold seep under my skin. I didn't scream. I didn't call for help, because only one thought was looping in my head. If this was a car theft, it was too clean. I went back inside and sat down on the kitchen floor. I didn't turn on the lights. It felt like doing that would make me more visible. A stupid thought, but at that moment, all of them were stupid and somehow necessary. I opened my laptop. The parking lot camera was still recording. The Dashcam was too. I found a new file. Timestamp 0244. Duration 1 hour and 12 minutes. I hit play. The image came up right away. The car was driving, confidently, like it was a normal route, like nothing had changed. And then I noticed something that dried my mouth instantly. This time, the sound was different. Before, I'd heard breathing, sometimes rustling. Now, I heard muffled crying, not loud, not hysterical, controlled, like the person knew that if they cried too loud, it would get worse. At the 27-minute mark, the car stopped. The back door opened again.
Sit still.
The voice was calm, male, certain. The recording cut out 30 seconds later. They found my car in the morning, 5 miles from my place. Clean, locked, full tank. The police took a report, asked the usual questions. Any conflicts, any deaths, anyone strange in my life. I didn't mention the video because I understood something very clearly. The moment I did, I'd have to explain why I was still alive, and I didn't have an answer. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at my car keys. I didn't hide them anymore. I understood hiding was pointless, because if someone can take your car without touching the locks, without breaking doors, without setting off the alarm, then they're already inside your life, and they're not in a hurry. Chapter 4. This was never about me. After they brought the car back, the house felt too quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. Not the early morning silence where the world hasn't decided yet whether it's going to wake up. This was different. The kind of silence where every sound feels like a rehearsal for something worse. I didn't drive for 2 days. The car sat under my window, clean, fully fueled, almost apologetic. I caught myself looking at it like it was something alive, like it could suddenly move without me. On the 3rd day, I finally went out, not to work, just to drive, just to prove to myself that control still existed. I drove slowly, listening to the engine, the tires, my own breathing. That's when I saw the first news article. Local teen reported missing. Nothing unusual, low-quality photo, short text. Last seen late at night heading home, police asking for help. I would have scrolled past it, I almost did, but in the background of the photo, behind the kid's shoulder, I recognized the shape, not a car, a place, an old gas station on a corner where the road bends in a strange way. I'd seen it before, at night, on the recording. I pulled over and read the article again. Time of disappearance, between 2 and 3 a.m. Something inside me started coming together slowly, like a puzzle you don't want to finish. Over the next few days, the stories kept showing up. Not close together, not as a pattern anyone talked about. Scattered. A girl who didn't make it home after a night shift. A man who went out for cigarettes. A teenager riding his bike to a friend's place. No one connected them. Not the police, not the media. But I did. The times, the locations, the routes. I opened a city map and started marking points. Carefully at first, then more confidently. Lines began to form, not perfect, but clear enough to make my stomach tighten. Every one of them ran along the same paths as my night drives. I closed the laptop, and for the first time since this started, I asked myself the right question. What if this was never about me at all? I started watching the recordings differently, not like the owner of the car, like a witness. I noticed things I'd missed before. The car almost never stopped in well-lit areas, always on the edge of light and shadow, always in places where you could disappear within a minute. I noticed something else. Before every stop, the driver slowed down slightly, not abruptly, almost imperceptibly, like he was evaluating something. Not the road, people. And that's when I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is what you feel when something is done to you personally. This was different, colder. I wasn't the target. I was a tool. I tried talking to the police, not about everything, not about the videos. I talked about the disappearances, the timing, the routes. They listened politely, took notes, nodded. Then they asked the question that ruined it. Why did you pay attention to these cases in particular? I knew if I answered honestly, the conversation would end right there. Coincidence. That word became my shield. That night, I didn't sleep again. I sat in the living room and waited for the camera notification. It came at 2:36, motion detected. I didn't open the app right away. I already knew what I'd see. My car sitting there, then headlights, then movement. I didn't run outside. I didn't try to stop it. I watched someone take my life and use it with more precision than I ever had. I understood something else too. This person wasn't afraid of me, wasn't afraid of the cameras, wasn't afraid of the police, because he knew that if anything went wrong, I'd be the one blamed. When the car came back before dawn, I went outside and put my hand on the hood. It was warm. I stood there thinking, not about how to stop this, but about how many more people would disappear before anyone noticed the pattern, and about the moment when this person might decide he didn't need the car anymore, which meant he wouldn't need me either.
Chapter 5. Someone had access. I didn't understand it right away. You never do. Things like this don't arrive as a revelation. They assemble themselves slowly, out of details that used to feel insignificant, out of pauses, habits, access. I was sitting at the kitchen table looking at my car keys. I didn't touch them. I just stared, the way you look at an object that suddenly feels suspicious, even though it hasn't changed at all. The keys were with me almost all the time, in my pocket, on the table next to the bed, sometimes left in my jacket. And that's when I asked myself the question I should have asked much earlier. Who else knew where they were? There weren't many answers. Not anyone, not strangers, only people who'd seen my life from the inside. I started replaying the last few months. Neighbors, coworkers, the mechanic, the parking attendant at the mall, the guy I once handed my keys to when the car stalled and I was in a rush. Every memory left the same aftertaste, not because I suspected those people, but because I couldn't remember exactly how long the keys had been out of my sight. Memory doesn't like precision, it likes confidence, and confidence is a terrible foundation for security. I went back to the recordings. This time I wasn't watching the road or the stops. I was watching details, the way the driver rested his hand on the gear shift, the way he adjusted the seat, the confidence with which he pressed buttons only someone who drives the car regularly would know. He wasn't searching, he wasn't testing, he knew. In one of the files, I noticed a detail that made my throat tighten. Before the drive started, the rear-view mirror was slightly tilted, just a little, in a way I never said it. I rewound, then skipped forward. It was the same in other recordings. Someone was adjusting the car for themselves, not temporarily, not carefully, like someone who planned on coming back. I started sleeping during the day. At night, I couldn't. At night, the house became too transparent. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the pipes clicking, the wind moving branches outside the window. Every sound felt like a rehearsal. One night, I did what I thought was my final line of defense. I installed a camera in the bedroom. I didn't point it at the bed, I pointed it at the door. It felt humiliating, admitting you no longer trust the space where you sleep. But fear had stopped caring about my dignity a long time ago. I lay down, turned off the light, and stayed perfectly still, counting my breathing. I didn't sleep. At 02:12, the camera detected movement. I saw it in the morning. The door didn't open, the handle didn't turn, but a shadow passed under the door, slowly, evenly, like someone had been standing there long enough to assess the situation. I closed the video and felt something inside me snap, because the shadow meant one thing: someone had been in my house, not in the car, not outside, here. That's when I began to see the structure. This wasn't one person who occasionally used my car. It was a system. One person with access, another with roots, a third handling execution. My car was perfect, clean history, no alerts, owner alive and unaware. I was perfect cover. And the worst part was this: I was still alive because I was still useful. That evening, I sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, thinking about what to do next. If I went to the police with the videos, I'd become a suspect. If I tried to disappear, they'd find me. If I did nothing, it would continue. It wasn't a dilemma, it was a cage. I looked at the glove compartment, then at the mirror, and for the first time since this started, a thought came that made the cold settle in. What if I don't just have to watch? What if I can interfere and the price is higher than I'm ready to pay? I started the engine, not to drive, just to hear how the car sounded when I was the one behind the wheel.
Chapter 6: The Illusion of Control. The morning after the shadow under the door, I acted like everything was normal. That wasn't denial, it was a decision. As long as you behave like a victim, you get used like one. As long as you act like someone who doesn't understand what's happening, you're considered safe. I realized something simple. If I wanted to see the truth, I had to give them room to make a mistake. And that meant creating a situation where they'd be confident everything was going according to their plan. I couldn't beat them with force. I couldn't even find their faces. But I could do what people do when they're backed into a corner. I could become inconvenient. I bought a second key, officially, through a dealer, with paperwork. I paid, picked it up, smiled like I was doing it just in case I ever lost the first one. Holding it in my hand almost made me laugh. All that fear reduced to a piece of metal. At home, I sat at the kitchen table and laid everything out in my head like evidence on a board. 1. The car drives at night. 2. The alarm never goes off. 3. The dashcam records routes and sound. 4. There is presence inside the house. 5. Once they returned the car with a full tank, which meant this wasn't about saving money, it was about keeping the system clean. A system. I repeated that word until it stopped being abstract. A system means routine, and routine means people stop paying attention. I decided to set bait, not for movie criminals who leave fingerprints and threats, but for people who move quietly and confidently. I took an old tracker, small, coin-sized, the kind people put in luggage, charged it, synced it, checked it on my phone. Then I sat there for a long time deciding where to hide it. Too obvious and they'd find it. Too complicated and I wouldn't be able to check it myself. I chose a place that felt stupid, which meant it was perfect. Inside the cover of the spare jack in the trunk under the rubber strap. I did it slowly, carefully, like a surgeon. When I finished, my fingers were shaking, not from fear, from a strange sense of control. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. The next step was worse. I had to fake weakness. I started living a little messier on purpose, left the car keys on the nightstand a couple of times instead of under the pillow, didn't check the kitchen window before bed, lay down and even turned on the TV to sell the idea of ordinary exhaustion. I tried to look the way I always had. That turned out to be harder than installing cameras, because now I knew there was someone outside my walls who listened to silence as carefully as I did. At 2:07 a.m., I woke up. Again, for no reason. Sleep wasn't impossible because of nightmares. It was impossible because at night, reality turned into waiting. I lay there, not moving, listening. At first, nothing. Then a faint click. Not in the room,
Downstairs, my neck tightened until it hurt. My heart ran steady, like an engine idling, quiet but inevitable. Another click, then a step. One. A pause. Another. This wasn't a thief's rush, no scrambling. This was the movement of someone who knew the house. I raised my hand and started recording on my phone, not because I thought I'd prove anything, because I wanted a trace, at least for myself. The footsteps stopped. I heard something brush lightly against the wall, like a hand sliding over wallpaper. Then silence.
I didn't know what to do with that kind of silence. Silence is the worst part. It's where the mind starts filling in details. And then I heard the sound that turned everything into a trap. The click of a key fob. That short, familiar sound you hear when a car unlocks. Through the bedroom window, I saw a brief flash of headlights. Not light, confirmation. My car had just been unlocked. I wanted to run downstairs, not heroically, not bravely, just out of instinct, the way you rush to save something that's already gone. But I forced myself to stay where I was, because the moment I ran, I'd turn back into a reaction, and I wanted to be action. I opened the tracker app. The dot was still, for now. Then it moved. My car pulled out of the lot. I watched the map on my phone and felt something strange, like a part of me was leaving while I stayed behind, pinned to the bed not by fear, but by logic. The dot moved confidently through familiar streets. Then it turned somewhere I never drove during the day, toward the industrial zone, the same place where the recordings had cut out more than once. I sat on the bed, gripping the phone like I had stopped the car with my hand. That's when I realized the bait might give me the truth, and at the same time that the truth could kill me. Because if I saw where they went, if I learned what they were transporting, I'd stop being neutral. A witness isn't someone who saw something. A witness is someone who has to be dealt with. 40 minutes later, the dot stopped. I zoomed in on the map. It was beyond the railroad tracks, where roads turn into service access, warehouses, empty lots, abandoned buildings. The car stayed there. I waited. 2 minutes. 3. And then the tracker showed something that made my palms go cold. The trunk opened. I couldn't see the trunk, but the motion sensor reacted to a sudden shift. Then a short series of small movements, like something heavy was being transferred. Then a pause. Long. And then movement again. The dot didn't move, but I could feel that something was happening out there, far away, something that shouldn't be happening. At 3:12 a.m., I got a notification from the home camera. Motion detected. Not in the parking lot, inside the house. It felt like the sound inside me was turned off. I opened the app. The hallway camera showed a dark corridor. Nothing. Then a strip of shadow. Someone standing at the bottom of the stairs. Not coming up, just standing there. Like they were listening. Like they were waiting for me to make the first move. And that's when I understood what I should have realized earlier. They weren't just taking the car. They were testing me, measuring how much I understood, watching how dangerous I was becoming. I turned off the screen, sat in the silence, and for the first time, I said it out loud. I can't live like this anymore. It didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a fact. My car came back before dawn, like always. Clean, locked, like nothing had happened. But now I knew something had changed. I had a point on the map, and they had a reason to come closer.
Chapter 7. The Night Passenger. In the morning, I drove there. Not right away. I gave myself a few hours to make sure I wasn't acting on emotion. Fear pushes you into sharp movements, and sharp movements are the one thing they don't need. I waited until the city fully woke up, until the roads filled with ordinary cars, until reality started looking like reality again. I drove during the day, along the same streets my car had driven at night without me. It felt strange, like following my own footprints left in a dream. In daylight, the places looked different, safer, almost boring. Warehouses, closed offices, abandoned parking lots with faded lines. And still, my body remembered. Somewhere here, the car had stopped. Somewhere here, the trunk had opened. Somewhere here, someone had been breathing too quietly. I parked near a fence that marked the edge of an old logistics center. Officially, it was closed, on paper. In reality, life hadn't stopped here. It had just changed shape. Tire marks, trash, fresh cigarette butts. Too many signs for a place that was supposed to be empty. I got out of the car and stopped. The silence was different from the silence at night, but it still pressed down on me. I walked farther in, careful not to leave obvious tracks. The ground was damp, and that scared me. Wet ground remembers footsteps. I saw tire marks leading behind one of the warehouses. Wide, familiar, my tires. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no doubt left. Behind the warehouse was an open area, nothing special. Concrete, dumpsters, an old loading ramp, and a smell. Not sharp, not immediately recognizable. A smell without a name, but one the body understands instantly.
I froze. It was the smell of human presence, fear, sweat, dirt, and something else, metallic. I didn't go any farther, not because I was scared, but because I understood something. Whatever had been here at night was gone now. Everything had been cleaned up. Everything temporary had disappeared. Only traces remained, like scars. I went back to the car and sat behind the wheel, closed the door. For a few seconds, I just stared through the windshield. That's when I noticed it. On the back seat, right near the edge, there was something lying there. Small, unremarkable, not mine. At first, I thought it was trash, a piece of fabric, but when I picked it up, my fingers tightened on their own. It was a child's sneaker, dirty, wet, no laces. I looked at it and felt something inside me bend, not snapping, just slowly deforming like metal under pressure. That object wasn't a threat, it was a message. You've already seen too much. I put the sneaker back and started the engine. Driving home felt heavy, like home no longer meant safety, only a point they could reach. That night, I didn't sleep again. I wasn't waiting for notifications. I knew they'd come. I was waiting for something else. The moment they realized I'd gone there during the day, to a place I wasn't supposed to go. At 2:19 a.m., the car left again. I didn't watch the map. I watched the Dashcam feed live. The screen was dark, the road familiar. But now I wasn't seeing a route, I was seeing intent. At the 14-minute mark, the sound inside the car changed. Before, I'd heard breathing, crying, sometimes a voice. Now I heard movement close to the camera. Not from the back, from the front. Someone leaned forward. The camera shook slightly, like a shoulder brushed against it. And for a second, a reflection appeared in the mirror. A face. Not all of it, just the lower half. Stubble, tight lips, someone else's skin. He looked straight into the mirror, straight at where I should have been.
You should have stayed home.
The recording didn't cut out. The car kept driving like nothing had happened, like it was just a normal conversation between a driver and a passenger. I sat in the dark and understood something. This wasn't a game of shadows anymore. This was a dialogue, and I couldn't pretend I didn't hear it.
Chapter 8. The Pattern. I didn't go home right away. I pulled over on the shoulder and sat there with the child's sneaker on my knees, holding it like evidence you can't hide and can't throw away. It was too small to belong to an adult, and too specific to be an accident. This wasn't forgotten. It was placed. Messages aren't always written with words. Sometimes they're left on the back seat. I opened my laptop right there in the car. My hands were shaking, but my head felt cold and clear. That happens when fear stops being abstract, when it gets weight and shape. I opened all the recordings, not one by one, all of them. Night files laid out by date, by route, by duration. I stopped seeing them as separate events. I started seeing them as nodes. The patterns became obvious.
My car didn't drive randomly. It moved in arcs, from point to point, always with intervals. I overlaid the routes on top of each other, and what formed on the screen made something inside me tighten. They created a network, not dense, sparse, sufficient, like someone was building a map where every drive was a thread and every stop a node through which something was passed along. I zoomed in, the same places, the same motels, the same warehouses, the same gas stations, and then I noticed something else. Between nights, there was always a window, 1 or 2 days of silence, like a pause between transfers. That's when it clicked. This wasn't improvisation. This was logistics. I opened the news again. This time I wasn't looking for names. I was looking for geography. The missing people no longer felt scattered. They lined up almost perfectly, like points marking a delivery route. A thought came that made me nauseous. My car wasn't an exception. If the system worked, it couldn't rely on one vehicle. Too risky, too visible, which meant there were other cars in this city, just as ordinary, just as invisible, with owners who woke up to slightly less fuel and told themselves they were just tired. We weren't victims. We were infrastructure.
I remembered the voice. You should have stayed home. It wasn't an angry warning, it was a statement of error. I'd broken a rule. Don't go during the day where the night lives. They'd let me see a little more than I was supposed to, and now they were watching what I do with that knowledge. Something else settled in, colder than before. If they wanted me gone, I'd already be gone, which meant I was still useful. I got home after dark. The house greeted me with ordinary silence. Nothing broken, no signs of struggle. The cameras were quiet. It was almost insulting, like reality was mocking me. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a long time. If I went to the police now, I'd become a suspect with a car linked to disappearances. If I tried to disappear, they'd find me, not because they were all-powerful, but because they had time. If I did nothing, the sneaker wouldn't be the last. This wasn't a choice between good and bad. It was a choice between bad and irreversible. I went out to the car and opened the trunk. It was empty. Too empty. I ran my hand along the inner lining and felt an uneven spot, almost imperceptible. I pressed and heard a dull sound, like a double bottom. I didn't open it because I understood that if I did, they'd know immediately, and I needed a little more time. For the first time since this began, I stopped thinking about how to survive. I started thinking about how to break the system without breaking myself first. I went back inside, sat at the table, and opened a notebook. I started writing, not a diary, a plan. What I knew, what I could prove, what I could change. I'm not a hero. I'm not a savior. I'm just a regular person who realized too late he'd become part of someone else's logistics. But every system has a weak point. Sometimes it's a node, sometimes it's a person, and sometimes it's a car that suddenly stops behaving the way it's expected to. I closed the notebook, and for the first time in all these nights, a thought came that pushed the fear back. If they think I'm infrastructure, then I can become interference.
Chapter 9. They make you the guilty one. I knew the next step couldn't be undone. Up until this point, everything had been happening around me. I was watching, recording, assembling the picture. Now I had to make a move that would shift attention. Not theirs, mine. I decided to give the system something it didn't expect, a mistake. I went out in the evening, deliberately earlier than usual. Not at night, not at 2 in the morning, at 10, when the streets are still alive but already thinning out.
I chose a route that never appeared in the night recordings and drove slowly, following every rule like I was performing for cameras and traffic lights, proving how normal I was. I knew they were watching, if not me, then the car. I stopped at a supermarket, went inside, bought a bottle of water, and paid with my card. Cameras, receipts, timestamps. I was leaving a trail on purpose, like someone who wants his path to be reconstructed later. Back in the car, I put the bottle on the passenger seat and drove on, toward an old roadside motel, one of the nodes I'd seen on the map. I wasn't planning to get out, I just wanted to mark presence. The parking lot was empty, not completely, a few cars, no people. The motel looked like places meant only for passing through. Faded curtains, one lit window, the buzz of a failing neon sign. I shut off the engine and sat there without moving. 1 minute, 2, 3, nothing happened. And that's when I realized I'd made a different kind of mistake. I was too visible.
The sirens came suddenly. First the sound, then the light. Red and blue reflecting off the windshield so brightly I had to squint. I didn't have time to be scared or surprised. I just felt everything inside me compress into a cold knot. I stepped out of the car with my hands raised, the way you're taught in instructions you hope you'll never need.
Stay where you are.
They moved fast, too fast for a routine check. They told me to lie on the ground, checked my ID, searched the car. One of the officers opened the trunk and froze. I could tell by his back, by the way he stopped moving.
Sir, can you explain this?
I stepped closer, and I saw it. There was a jacket in the trunk, not mine, stained, and beneath it, marks that left no room for doubt. I didn't ask what exactly they were seeing. I already knew. That's when I understood the elegance of the system. The moment I started acting on my own, I became a variable, and variables get eliminated. At the station, everything was sterile and calm. No yelling, no threats, no violence. They just listened and asked questions I had no safe answers to. Why were you at the motel? Why has your car appeared in other areas at night? Why didn't you report the thefts earlier? Each answer sounded worse than the last. I could see it on their faces. I wasn't a victim. I was a convenient explanation. When they released me, temporarily with conditions, dawn was already breaking. I sat in the car and couldn't start the engine for a long time. My hands wouldn't cooperate. My phone vibrated. A message. No number.
Now you're visible.
I didn't reply. I understood that I couldn't act alone anymore, and I understood something else, something worse than suspicion or accusation. They weren't planning to kill me. Not yet, because now I was the perfect scapegoat.
Chapter 10. I saw his face. I didn't recognize him in the moment of recognition. I recognized him in the absence of surprise. It happened during the day, when fear feels least convincing, when the streets are full of people and danger seems like something that only exists at night. I was driving through the city, doing everything that was now expected of me, not standing out, not stopping, not making sudden moves. After the station, I became more careful, but not smarter. Intelligence is a luxury when you're already being watched. I pulled into a coffee shop near my place, not because I wanted coffee. I needed to test a thought. I parked the car, sat by the window, and ordered the simplest drink possible, something that wouldn't make me wait. I needed the reflection. I wasn't watching people. I was watching reactions.
Who held their gaze on the car longer than necessary? Who looked not at me, but through the glass, like they were checking whether I was still there? Who knew what I already knew? That's when I saw him. He was standing at the counter with his back to me. Ordinary, nothing remarkable, around 40, dressed neatly but without style, the kind of person you don't remember, the kind of person people use. He turned, took his coffee, and our eyes met for a second. That second was enough. I recognized the lips, the stubble, the calm. It was the same face I'd seen reflected at night. Only now there was no shadow, no distortion, no darkness. He didn't look away. He nodded, not like an enemy, like someone confirming receipt of a signal. I didn't move. He walked past me without speeding up. Near the exit, he stopped as if he'd just remembered something and said, without turning around,
Nice car.
it almost sounded polite.
When he left, I felt the tension release from my muscles. Not because it was safe, but because the unknown was over. Fear needs mystery. Now there was none. I didn't follow him. That would have been a beginner's mistake. Instead, I finished my coffee, left a tip, and walked out 5 minutes later. Just long enough not to look rushed. The parking lot was calm. My car was still there. Cameras, people, light. And still, I knew he wanted me to see him. This wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. At home, I sat at the table and opened my notebook. I wrote down his name, not because I knew it, but because I knew he had one. People without names are fear. People with names are structure. I started searching, not deeply, not officially. I looked for traces, not data. Things like that surface in small places, old posts, photos, mentions in comment threads. After a couple of hours, I had a face connected to addresses, addresses connected to companies, companies connected to cargo. He wasn't the head. He was a node, a driver, a handler, someone who made sure the system didn't glitch. And I was his glitch. My phone vibrated closer to evening. Another message. No number again.
You had a chance to stop.
I stared at the screen, and for the first time since this began, I felt anger. Not hysteria, not panic. The kind of anger that comes when you're forced into a position where every choice is a loss. I typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, deleted it again. In the end, I sent one word, when. The answer came almost immediately.
Tonight.
I understood this wouldn't be a meeting. It would be a test. They'd already tried fear. Now they were testing obedience. I walked out to the car and sat behind the wheel. I wasn't asking myself whether I'd survive anymore. I was asking something else. How many people would disappear if I obeyed tonight?
Chapter 11. The Deal. He didn't give me a place. He gave me a time. 11:40 p.m. Specific enough to matter, vague enough to take preparation away. Things like this don't need coordinates. They need consent. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to show strength, but because I understood my answer wasn't required. Showing up would be the answer. At 11:15, I left the house. No documents, no notebook, no backup phone. Anything extra would look like defense, and defense reads as resistance. I got in the car and drove. Not to the motel, not to the warehouses, not anywhere the car had already been at night. I let the city decide for me. Turned where streets felt emptier, slowed when I felt watched, sped up when roads became too open. At 11:38, I stopped at a red light. A white van pulled up next to me. No logos, no markings. The kind of vehicle nobody remembers. The window went down.
Turn right on green.
I didn't look, didn't turn my head. I nodded.
We didn't drive long. I kept distance, not too close, not too far. They weren't in a hurry. When you have control, urgency looks unprofessional. The van turned behind a closed shopping center. I followed, headlights off, engines quiet. The back door opened. He stepped out alone. No weapon, no escort. The way people walk when they know escalation won't be their problem.
You've been busy.
I stayed in the car.
You broke the rhythm. That's bad for everyone.
For them?
For you.
I stepped out. Cold air hit my face hard. Asphalt, dust, something sweet underneath it. Wrong.
You think you're helping. That's cute.
There are people. Kids.
There are systems.
No anger, no defense, like stating gravity.
You don't stop a system by screaming at it. You stop it by not breaking it.
I understood the offer. Not money, not threats. Normal life. Keep driving. Don't look, don't interfere. The car stays in rotation. The files disappear. Cameras stop recording. Fuel stays full. No more shoes on the back seat. A clean illusion. And if I say no,
then we'll need a cleaner story.
like the motel? He looked at me longer this time. That was my mistake. I showed I knew too much.
You're already visible. This is the part where you choose how long.
I looked at him and thought about how easily people accept not being in control. How convenient that is. How light it makes the conscience. And I realized I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of living the rest of my life knowing that every time I turned the key, someone vanished. I can't.
Then don't drive tonight. Go home.
And tomorrow?
Tomorrow is logistics.
He went back to the van and closed the door. I stood alone under cold parking lot lights. I knew if I drove home now, the conversation would be over, and another life would begin. Quiet, dirty, long. I got back into the car, started the engine, and did the one thing they didn't expect. I didn't go home.
Chapter 12. The Last Route. I drove without navigation. There was no point anymore. I knew the city well enough to not ask for directions, and I knew the system well enough to understand where it would pull itself. A system doesn't like sharp deviations, it smooths them out. I planned to use that against it. I chose one of the clean routes, the ones my car had used most often, the ones already built into their logic. I drove calmly within the speed limit, doing nothing that might draw the attention of patrol cars. If everything went right, I wouldn't be stopped. If not, it wouldn't matter anymore. Halfway through, I did something I had once thought impossible. I switched the Dashcam to manual mode. It always recorded, but now I wanted intention. I wanted a file that couldn't be erased quietly. I connected the backup memory card, the same one I had bought with the tracker. It was hidden under the interior paneling in a place no one checks without tools. I knew this: if they found me, they might not find the card, and if they did, it meant I had already lost long before tonight. The car brought me there on its own. I was barely surprised when I saw the familiar turn, the old access road to the industrial zone, the same stretch beyond the railroad tracks, the node. At night, it looked the same as during the day, just more honest. It hid nothing, only concrete, shadows, and silence. I stopped where the car always stopped, killed the engine, got out. Cold air hit my chest. I felt my body try to activate fear, but fear was late. Its place had already been taken by decision. I opened the trunk. The false bottom didn't give in right away. It was built carefully, professionally, not improvised. I removed the panel and saw what they never intended to show in daylight. Straps, plastic restraints, marks that can't be explained by transporting objects. I didn't touch anything unnecessary. I just turned on the camera and let it see what only those who shouldn't ever see it usually do.
Headlights flared behind me. I didn't turn around.
You really don't listen.
I slowly closed the trunk and turned. He wasn't alone. The van stood at the edge of the lot. Its door was open. Darkness inside. No faces visible, but I felt their presence. Not as fear, as pressure.
It's over. You don't win this.
I know, but neither do you. I raised my hand and showed him the small red camera light. He stared at it for several seconds, then nodded.
You think this changes anything?
It changes timing. I got back into the car and hit the gas. I drove toward the place where the routes converged, where the system became too dense to stay unnoticed. I knew they wouldn't shoot. Not here, not like this. Their strength was silence, not noise. The van's headlights flickered in my rearview mirror, but didn't close the distance. They followed, controlled. I merged onto the highway, and then something happened that had never appeared in any recording before. A police siren. First one, then another. I smiled for the first time in a long while. Not because it felt easier, but because the system had failed.
Chapter 13. The system doesn't end. The sirens didn't get closer. I realized it too late. The sound was real. I wasn't mistaken. But it wasn't coming toward me. It was passing by. A patrol car rushed along a parallel road and vanished into the night, like proof that the world was still following its own logic, one that had nothing to do with me. The van didn't speed up, didn't slow down. It just kept moving behind me, holding that same distance, the kind that doesn't look like a threat. And that's when I understood my final mistake. I thought I was breaking the system from the inside, when in reality I had sunk deeper into it than ever before. The lot behind the railroad tracks was empty, too empty. I stopped where the car always stopped, killed the engine. The camera was still recording. The red indicator looked almost mocking, a tiny light of hope that illuminated nothing. I opened the trunk. The false bottom was empty. No straps, no plastic restraints, no traces. Just a perfectly clean surface and a faint smell of plastic, as if the trunk had never been used for anything else. I stood there, staring into the emptiness, and in that moment I understood. They knew I would come here. They knew when, they knew why, and they prepared.
You really thought you were early.
Evidence doesn't disappear.
It relocates.
He wasn't threatening me. He wasn't justifying himself. He was explaining something obvious.
Systems don't end. They just learn.
I raised the camera.
That file will exist, but it won't matter.
I only understood what he meant later. They didn't detain me. They let me go. No handcuffs, no release papers. Just let me go. No official charges, no interrogations, no news. My car disappeared. Not impounded, not confiscated. Disappeared from the database, from the parking lot, from every record, as if it had never existed. A week later, I understood what was really happening. There were news reports, investigations too, but they all went in another direction. Other cars, other routes, other cities. The system didn't collapse, it relocated. And that's when I understood why they left me alive. Sometimes at night I wake up thinking I hear the click of a key fob. Sometimes it feels like there's movement in the hallway, not footsteps, but presence. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that months later I started catching myself thinking, if I had a car again, not to run, not to prove anything, but to check, to look, to make sure. Because inside me there's a hollow space now, and it's filled with knowledge. And knowledge is a form of infection too. I live quietly. I walk everywhere.
I don't leave traces, but sometimes passing a parking lot, I notice a car that's too clean for its age, and I wonder if its owner knows that at night it lives a different life. And every time I choose not to come closer, because I know once you've seen the system, it has already noticed you.